welcome to an on-the-shelf episode of Brutal Battle. Yes, I'm doing another one of these solo, and actually going forward, it might just be solo for the on-the-shelf. Well, I guess I can't say just, but I'm sure here and there Rebecca will want to join for this. It's just, I want to keep this going with just me so I can do this one on my own, not have to rely on other people for it, and also give Rebecca a bit of a break when she's felt like she's been recording a lot of these episodes, because if people remember, this is my podcast that I started, and I kind of just pulled Rebecca into it. So, you're always going to continue to get exactly what I've offered with the show, which is trying beers and evaluating them. It'll just be, a few of these will be solo, so it's not going to be a lot, but here's one of them. So I have a lineup, as usual, of 4 beers. 3 of them are 16-ounce cans, 1 is a 12-ounce bottle. As we all know, bottles are starting to become a little less prevalent, as cans are definitely increasing in popularity, specifically 16-ounce cans, which I'm very excited to see. One of these beers, Rebecca and I picked up together kind of recently, and I was like, oh, I'm just going to throw that in because we want to try it anyway, and it just came out recently. The other 3, Rebecca literally went out yesterday? Yeah, literally went out yesterday and picked these other 3 up. I said if you could just swing by the liquor store, pick up whatever 3 beers you think would be good. And she got a pretty good smattering of styles, I'll say. So, yeah, just jumping right into it. I'm just going to give a little bit of information with each one, and that's just off the top of my head type stuff. So this first beer is one of the ones in a 16-ounce can, and this is not a brewery I've heard of. This is one of the things going on. There's so many breweries, and I cannot keep track. I'm sure a lot of you listening cannot keep track either. It's craziness. So here's a beer by Foreign Objects, is what the brewery's called. Foreign Objects Beer Company out of Pottstown, Pennsylvania. So not all that too far from me. And this is their Trocken Gehumpf Pilsner. Trocken Gehumpf Pilsner. Wonderful. Not easy for people to say. Mit Matueka and Mosaic. So it is in German. So it's, I assume, a German Pilsner with Matueka and Mosaic hops. And it is 5.5% alcohol. So, as you know, well, let me get this open first. As you know, Rebecca and I have been enjoying our Pilsners and lighter styles in general recently. So we're trying to kind of incorporate some of that into the show. I know, unfortunately, for the longest time, this show was kind of devoid of the lighter styles. Not really doing much English-style stuff. Not going to, like, lagers, pilsners, kolsches, cream ales, things like that. So, but also those things haven't been all that popular. But, you know, we're starting to see more lagers, more pilsners, more, well, not really more cream ales, I wish. And not more kolsches either, but I also wish. So anyway, this looks a little bit hazy, actually. It's pretty yellow, slight tinge of orange to it, but pretty yellow. Little bit hazy, not a crazy amount, but it's definitely not clear either. And there's a bit of a head to it, as I have poured it agitated. Okay. It definitely has a hoppy aroma to it. So when it says Pilsner with Matuek and Mosaic, I think it's kind of a generously hopped Pilsner, which I had one, we talked about it on our Richmond vacation trip, where we went to the Vale, and they had their child support, which was a Pilsner, I think also a German-style Pilsner, but with some extra hopping, and that was with Hallertau Mittelfrüh, I believe. So this one kind of smells like that. I get a little bit of a resininess in the nose, definitely getting those hop oils coming to the forefront. Can definitely smell the kind of Pilsner yeast, and there is a nice kind of clean finish to it. But there's a lot of like citrus right up front. Yeah, a little bit of pine, a little bit of citrus, definite Pilsner malt smell. Huh. Yeah. I'm trying to reach for that, what that specific citrus kind of smells like. Actually, I think there's a little bit of pineapple mixed in there. So it's like an orange and a pineapple. It smells good. You can go in for it. My first taste ever of anything by foreign objects. Mm-hmm. It's significantly more bitter than I expected it would be, because I didn't smell a ton of bitterness on it. That's a decent bitterness, and it kind of finishes bitter, and bitterness is kind of what stays with you. It does taste relatively hoppy up front, and like I'm saying, like it's an orange, and it's a pine mainly. It's got more of a body to it than I was expecting. It's a tad bit syrupy, not like a lot, but like a tad bit syrupy, which you usually don't get with Pilsners. So that kind of lets me know it's a generously hopped Pilsner. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Definitely plenty of hop flavor in there, plenty of bittering in there. It's got a cleanness to it throughout, but it finishes super bitter. So, it's interesting because I don't know that people would necessarily pick up that this is a generously hopped Pilsner. I think some people might just be like, oh, it's just a really light IPA. Because, like I said, there's a lot of hop flavor to it and a lot of bitterness. Yeah, decent pine. A little bit of honey in there as I keep sipping it. Maybe a little bit of like an alfalfa type note. It's decent. I don't love it, but I also don't dislike it. It kind of reminds me a little bit of the Child Support by the Veil, but I'm not enjoying it quite as much. So, that one's alright. Okay, moving on to number 2. This episode might not end up being super long. I know usually my episodes are between like 30 and 45 minutes-ish, so if they end up coming up a bit shorter, especially for these solo ones, please don't be mad about it. But if you are, you can go ahead and email. Just let me know. Actually, any feedback on episode formats, guests, what you do and don't like that we do, beer suggestions, new format suggestions, whatever. Just email brutalbattlepodcast@gmail.com. Okay, moving on. The second beer, also in a 16-ounce can. Rebecca brought this home, and she was like, oh, I thought this would be really cool for this one particular reason. So it's a collaboration beer between Manor Hill Brewing, who's out of Ellicott City, Maryland, and we've had some of their stuff. Most recently, we had their porter on, which I think was on another On the Shelf episode, actually. Maybe the last one. And they did this in collaboration with Balt County Brewery, or they're just going by BC Brewery, and they're out of Hunt Valley, Maryland. Now, it's called Getting the Band Back Together, and it's got kind of guys on it that look like the Blues Brothers, in essence. The beer is 7.5% alcohol, and it's an IPA. So the interesting thing about it being named Getting the Band Back Together is collaboration between Manor Hill and BC Brewery. There is a commonality there. The head brewer and partial owner of BC Brewery, Jim Wagner, used to be the head brewer at Duclaw Brewing in Baltimore. Well, technically Rosedale, Maryland. And Kurt Kroll, who is now the head brewer at Manor Hill in Ellicott City, used to be, I believe, an assistant brewer under Jim Wagner at Duclaw. So it's called Getting the Band Back Together because they're getting back together to collaborate on this beer, which I thought was pretty cool. So let's go ahead and pop it. Pour this bad boy. So, it is 7.5%. It's being billed as a straight IPA. I kind of feel like at 7.5, you can kind of choose, and if you want to call it a double or an imperial, or you can just keep it at IPA. It's kind of, there are varying opinions on where these things lie. I think there might be some, like, a technicality as far as, like, BJCP guidelines for style go, but I think amongst breweries, they kind of just get loose with it. Okay, so this is very orange, actually. It's like a burnt orange color. It's relatively clear. I think if there's any non-clearness, it's just because the color is relatively dark. It's not really hazy or anything. But yeah, super orange. The smell, it smells pretty sweet. Ooh, there's one particular smell in there that's interesting to me. I want to try and pick that out. What is that smell? It's a little roasty, actually. That's what it is. There's like this uncommonly roasty note in the nose that I'm just not used to with an IPA. There is kind of like a dehydrated orange in there, because there is citrus, but it's also smelling syrupy and kind of sugary. But not sugary in a bad way. Oh, and melon. There is a melon smell in there, like a cantaloupe. No, maybe more like a honeydew. Or cantaloupe and honeydew together, but melon, nonetheless. Definitely smells like melon. And a little bit of bubblegum in there as well. Wow, there's actually a lot going on in this nose. That's super interesting. It smells good, though. Let's go in. Okay. So based off what I was smelling, I was anticipating much more of a mouthfeel to it. It's kind of like a heavy low, like a high-low mouthfeel to it. It's not quite in the medium range for me. Not that that's a problem, because it's not. It is relatively sweet. There is a decent bitterness on the end of it. I actually don't think it's as much of a bitterness as the first beer, the Trockengehumpf Pilsner. Actually, is that called Symphonie des Gruyens? I don't even know. That whole thing's in another language. Sorry. Back to getting the band back together. It has darker flavors. It definitely has darker flavors. It does have that like dehydrated orange. It's got a bit of a sweetness to it. There's a little bit of a pininess playing in there. And yeah, I do feel like I get slightly that melon. It's interesting. It kind of carries throughout, but it's like super light. It's just like a kiss of it throughout each sip. Pretty clean beer. As I keep sipping it, that bitterness is starting to come down a little bit, but my alcohol perception is increasing a bit. So that's kind of interesting. So this is one of those IPAs that's kind of more along the lines of you have to pay attention to it, and especially because it does have a little bit more of a roasty note with the malt profile. So it makes you pay attention more. Darker flavors as well. When it's not super light, you just got to pay more attention. Okay. Solid brew. That's one that I'm not crazy wild about it, but I like it. I do like it. Oh, and as I took my final gulp of what was left in my glass, on the very end of the finish, I got a slight bubblegum. Like I said, I was getting in the nose. All right, rinse that out. Okay, so the next one is the one in a 12-ounce bottle. And this is a beer that Rebecca and I have been anticipating coming out this year, and we've been quite excited about it. Not because we know that it'll be good or suspect that it'll be good, but it sounds interesting. Now, it's by Dogfish Head Brewing. They're out of Milton, Delaware, and it is their The Perfect Disguise Double IPA, and it is 8% alcohol by volume. So there's a picture on it of a hop inside of a robot that it's operating, which is basically a German guy in like traditional German garb, like lederhosen, and holding like a beer stein. And in the other hand, he's holding a bunch of wheat. So the reason that picture's there is because this is a double IPA, but it's called The Perfect Disguise because it's, I believe, a Kolsch. The base of it's a Kolsch, but it's done in double IPA style, is what the ordeal is with this. Now, when I had heard about that, I was like, that sounds very interesting. So, interested. Okay, so it says a double dry hopped IPA is what it says. That's all it categorizes it as, but I know that it's supposed to be like a Kolsch kind of disguised, but did I say 8%? Because it's 8%. All right, I'm going to get into this. I'm very interested in this because this is one of those beers where, and I'm sure everyone's had these, where you hear the description of it, of what the style is, and you're just kind of like, it's a question mark in your head. You're like, this could be really good. This could not work at all. And that's kind of how I thought. I was just very perplexed by what this would end up being. And then I also thought, it made me think, there's Dogfish Head at it again. They're still innovating after all these years, which is very impressive in my opinion, because a lot of larger breweries, once they've been at the forefront, they start getting surpassed by a lot of other breweries. And in some ways, Dogfish Head has been surpassed by other breweries. You know, they're not doing a ton of sours. They're not doing the hazy IPAs. They're not doing a ton of barrel-aged beers. But they're still doing their own thing, and they're still innovating. And I think this, just the fact that this beer exists, is one of those testaments to the fact that they're still pushing boundaries. And to that, I say, awesome on you, Dogfish Head and Sam Calagione, and everyone there, because staying fresh and doing new things is how you stay relevant in the craft beer industry. So anyway, the perfect disguise. Relatively clear. There's a slight haze to it. It's pretty orange, slight tinge of yellow to that orange. I'm hoping this smells nice. Ooh. It smells confusing. It smells pretty confusing, actually. I smell citrus, but I also smell a lot of honey, but it's also kind of like, it's weird. It's not just like a sweet honey note. It's like a honey, natural raw honey with honeycomb in it, because there's almost a waxy note in the nose. Kind of odd. It does smell kind of wheat-like in nature. And it's got a little bit of like an earthy spiciness, which is interesting. Yeah, it's got like an earthy spiciness. You might be able to trick me if I didn't know what this beer was. You might be able to have me smell it and trick me and say, hey, there's rye in there, because it's that type of kind of like an earthy spice to it. That is interesting. And there's pine, which I think is going along with that note I was just describing. Huh. Okay. It smells a little more syrupy than I would assume it would be, basically being like a Kolsch disguised as an IPA. Well, double. All right, here we go. Okay. This is weird. This is weird. So, okay. I'm going to describe this a certain way, and it's going to sound really weird, but this is the best way I can do it. Each sip is like a syrupy beer coating a light-bodied beer. It's so weird because as soon as I take the sip, it presents as like thick and syrupy, and then it just quickly changes to feeling like it's light and refreshing. It's so odd. I've literally never experienced that with a beer before. So, flavor-wise, I get that kind of like raw honey type deal. It was a little like the slight touch of like the wax from the honeycomb. I get like a candied pineapple in there. If anyone's ever had like dehydrated candied pineapple, I get that kind of flavor. I get a slight peach hit in there. This is a very interesting beer. There's not a whole lot of bitterness. Actually, let me qualify that. In the beginning and in the middle of each sip, there is an okay amount of bitterness, and then it seems to just dissipate at the very end, where I'm saying that it's finishing very light. And I guess this is what this does. I was very intrigued to find out what this beer would turn into, and it's definitely unique. I very much am interested in this. I can't stop drinking it just because I'm very perplexed at how the flavors present themselves, how the mouthfeel changes throughout each sip. It's very interesting. And it's starting to get a little drying on the finish as I keep sipping it too. Wow. That's really weird, but interesting and cool at the same time. I like it. Everyone, honestly, if you can get a hold of that, at least just go out and get yourself like one bottle just to try. because I think even if you're not going to love it, it's worth trying just to experience how different it is. Okay, now I'm going to the final one. This one in a 16-ounce can, and I have a bowl on the side just in case it decides to overflow, because it's a nitrogenated beer. It is by a brewery who I've quite liked for years now, but have only been able to get them either if I go into Pennsylvania or if I order online, and now they just finally showed up in Maryland, maybe like a month or so, maybe a month or two ago, and our local liquor store finally just got them in, I believe, last week. Modern Times Beer Company, and they're out of, I believe, San Diego, I want to say. Yep, San Diego, California. This beer is their Black House. Their Black House is their regular stout, but this is a special one. Not only is it on nitro, but it has coffee, coconut, and cocoa added to it. So a stout, nitrogenated with coffee, coconut, and cocoa, and it is 5.5% alcohol. And I can read you. They always put specifics on this with ingredients. Modern Times does that, so I can read you that a little bit. Let me try this. So I've had before their just regular Black House. I don't think I've had any special versions of the Black House before, so this should be interesting. Okay. So it does say on the can that you should do a pretty agitated, well, I think it says aggressive pour to kind of like really let the nitrogen get in there. It says for best results, vigorously pour. Although, I mean, I will for as much as I'm putting in here, but I'm not going all the way. So let me go through all this, do the smelling, do the tasting, all that, and then I'll tell you what's, the specifics of what's in there. Okay, so it looks like a stout. It's very dark, but around the edges, you can get like a reddish-brownish color. You can tell it's nitrogenated because the head on top of it is super creamy. The bubbles are really small. It smells very strongly of coffee. I definitely get the cocoa in there then after that. Am I going to get coconut? A lot of the time, it's hard for me to pick up coconut in some of these beers because a lot of the times they don't use a ton of coconut. It's just a little bit or just enough to get it in the flavor, but you can't really perceive it in the nose. And with something like coffee in there, and as strong as this coffee smells, I am not surprised that I can't really pick up coconut because it kind of masks it. Yeah, the cocoa comes in after the coffee, but the coffee nails you up front because it is very, very, very strong. It's like a medium roast coffee is what it smells like. So relatively roasty. It smells really good. It smells light as well. Yeah, and there's like a little bit of a chalkiness on the nose. Maybe a little bit of a dark chocolate as well because it smells relatively bitter at the end. All right, I'm going to try it. Ooh. Oh, I get the coconut, though. Wow. And it didn't take long. First sip, I actually got the coconut. That's awesome. And the coconut's up front, which is, I think, a first in a long time for a beer like this. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. So, it's really weird because where the coffee is up front and then the cocoa and no coconut in the nose, in the flavor, the coconut's up front with a little bit of sweetness. Then I get the cocoa and like a sweet milk chocolate with the cocoa. And then I get the coffee after that. And it's creamy all the way through because of the nitrogen. This is nice. Wow. This is an achievement, to be honest. And like I said, it's so weird that like the smell and the flavor are the profiles with the aroma and the flavor, but they're totally flipped around. It's craziness. This beer is really good, actually. And honestly, I could see an additional, like taking this beer a little bit further, maybe doing another iteration of it. If they then threw in a little bit of cinnamon, people would be all about that. Because the way this flavor profile tastes, especially with how creamy it is, if you just lay a little cinnamon in there, it would complement everything very nicely. That beer is very good. Wow. I like that a lot. So I remember having just a straight up Black House stout before and just being like, it's a decent stout. It's okay. But this, the coffee, coconut, cocoa, and nitro addition to it kicks it way up. So if you're at a store and you see Modern Times there, or if you're shopping online and you can do that, and you see, Modern Times Black House or Modern Times Black House Nitro with coffee, coconut, and cocoa, go with the Nitro one. The other thing I wanted to note about Modern Times that I really like is they're employee-owned. I think maybe 2 years ago now, they purchased all their shares back and gave them to their employees. So they are an employee-owned company, which I think is awesome. So I like to support them because of that, but I also like to support them because I've not had a beer by them that I didn't enjoy. They make a lot of really good stuff. Their Blazing Worlds is a really awesome hoppy amber. Their Fortunate Islands is a really nice hoppy wheat beer. That's all I can kind of remember off and they have Fruitlands, are some of their sour beers with fruit added. Those are really good too. Okay. So here's the information I told you I was going to give you. The coffee, first of all, the IBUs they list as 30. The coffee is 75% Ethiopian and 25% Sumatran. Interesting. Then it is 2-row, kiln coffee, Munich, flaked barley, pale chocolate, roasted barley, crystal 60, midnight wheat, and oats added. So the oats are helping with that creaminess in addition to the nitrogen. Okay. That is good to know. Rebecca's going to be really happy with that when she gets home and tries it. Yes, I'm recording by myself in the house. I get first crack at the beers. What do you know? You know, when I do it by myself, I get to set my own time for recording, and I get as much of the beer as I want, pretty much. Big plus. Okay, so I am doing a rinse because I need to go back for the ranking and try these beers real quick. Retry that Foreign Objects. Foreign Objects tasting solid. I'm sure people can already tell what my number one is going to be. It's pretty obvious. Okay. Okay. I got it. Okay. So my number 4 is going to be the... Actually, I'm between these two. Okay. It's very, very close for number 3 and number 4. I enjoy all these beers to differing degrees, but I enjoy them all. So I would say my number 4 at the moment is the Getting the Band Back Together collaboration between Manor Hill Brewing and BC Brewery. That's my number 4. My number 3 is the Foreign Objects Trucken Gehupf Pilsner, or I think it's called Symphony des Gruyens. The problem is there's so much writing on this can, it's unbelievable. And it's in a different language, and these people are from Pennsylvania. Please stop. And the design of the can's actually not very nice either. So, packaging and marketing, change it. Sorry. Pet peeve. Okay, so number 2, the Dogfish Head Perfect Disguise Double IPA. That beer is mind-boggling and crazy and weird, but it's also tasty at the same time and must be tasted to be experienced. Everyone go get some if you can. And then my number 1, as people are probably like, obviously, the Modern Times Black House on Nitro with coffee, coconut, and cocoa. That beer is really tasty. I'm talking really tasty. And if you can get your hands on it, get your hands on it. That's a must. And if you can buy it online, Craft Beer Kings usually has some Modern Times stuff, and maybe that'll be there. Check it out. Anyway, thank you everyone for checking this episode out once again. Like I said, if you have any sort of feedback, brutalbattlepodcast@gmail.com. But also, if I could ask you a favor, word of mouth helps with the podcast a lot. Tell people about the podcast if you enjoy it. Get some new people listening. and ratings and reviews through whatever you listen on. The big one is iTunes, if you could help me out on that. If you go to iTunes, write a review, give us a rating, that would be awesome. So thank you everyone for checking this out, and until next time, keep it brutal.
This has been a Nerd Circle podcast production.